Now it's time, though, for our talkSPORT Explainer. This is the part of the show where our panellists try and make sense of a question swirling round the world of football at the moment. And today, we want to focus on a particular case. With all the talk of Barclaysmen recently, I wonder if you've been sat wondering what Lassana Diarra's been up to. Remember him? Well, the former Chelsea, Arsenal, Portsmouth and Real Madrid midfielder has recently been engaged in a long-running legal battle with FIFA. It's all to do with the termination of his contract at Lokomotiv Moscow in 2014, and there's been a big breakthrough because the European Court of Justice, the highest court in Europe, has now ruled that some of FIFA's rules around transfers would break European Union laws. What's interesting is the ripple effect of this Diarra ruling could be huge, with some saying the decision could change the landscape of football. Stefan, as a legal expert, of course, would you be able to outline for us what has happened so far in this case?
Yeah, I mean, in simple terms, Diarra moved to Lokomotiv Moscow in 2014, fell out with the manager. They didn't like the way that he was playing or training, and they said that they wanted to reduce his salary. Quite how they could do that contractually, I'm not sure, but that's what they did. Diarra obviously wasn't very happy and walked out. Ultimately, FIFA decided in favour of Lokomotiv Moscow that walking out was without just cause, which is a term that's used in the FIFA regulations, and that Diarra needed to pay compensation of 10 million euros to Moscow. And whilst that case was going on, he wanted to go and sign for a Belgian club. They said to FIFA, can we sign this player, and can you confirm to us that we won't be on the hook for the 10 million euro that he owes Moscow? Because the way it works at the moment, before this case, is that you have something called a solidarity liability, whereby if you take a player who has left another club without just cause, the club is also jointly liable for any compensation that's payable. And so the Belgian club asked FIFA whether they were going to be okay and held harmless in respect of that liability that Diarra had to Moscow. FIFA said, actually, no, you wouldn't be, because under the rules you are liable, potentially. And by the way, we also presume that you have induced the player to leave. Again, another one of the FIFA rules, presumption of inducement, i.e. that they made him move. It wasn't actually what happened, but that's the presumption in the FIFA rules. Anyway, to cut a long story short, this case went to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. That upheld FIFA's decision that he'd left without just cause, and that he owed Moscow 10 million euros. And Diarra, in that intervening period, took the whole case to the Belgian courts, who passed it on to the European courts. And the European court said, actually, by the way, all of those rules that we've just talked about, the solidarity liability, the presumption of inducement, and something called the international transfer certificate, which was effectively held and wouldn't be released to the Belgian club until he paid the 10 million euros. All of that part of the FIFA transfer regulations are unlawful and effectively need to be removed, which is where we are now.
Dale, what do you make of this case? As the West Ham CEO, Karen Brady, has said in her column in The Sun, she's worried that this transfer case, because of the potential power it could give to players and agents, the result could be complete chaos and anarchy. Do you go along with that?
I wouldn't put it that highly. Actually, I don't think it'd be complete chaos or anarchy, but I think it could be a really important rebalancing. We could see clubs take very different position when they're looking to spend hundreds of millions on a player. For example, I mean, it happens in lower leagues, right? It's happened to us. You spend money on a player, it doesn't work out. They want to leave, we let them leave, but you've lost the money. But I think it's an important ruling for human rights. But, to tell this guy he can't play for another club until he pays this fine that they say he's due to pay, this compensation, I think that's wrong. The European Court has found that. So I think it's a fundamentally important ruling, in the same way, actually, that the tribunal found that the Premier League rules were against competition rules. I welcome the intervention of courts in that way and in that case, and I think this one's important.
In that regard, do you think it's a surprise it's taken this long for the rules to be scrutinised to this level?
Yes, I do. Yeah, because there's an undue control, I would say, in the freedom of a player, which is a person. right? To live their lives and choose where they go and where they work.
Do you feel that most CEOs or chairmen will go along with what Dale was saying there?
Well, certainly.
Or may they look at it a bit more closely to Karen Brady?
I don't think Karen Brady at this stage can make those proclamations. I think it's too early to know exactly how it's going to pan out and the sorts of changes that will ripple through all of the transfer statutes that FIFA have. There is clearly going to have to be some changes, but it's not clear exactly how it's going to whether it's going to be a revolution of transfer regulation in the way Bosman was, or whether this is something more around the edges. You know, a similar sort of situation to the City case that we've already discussed. It's unclear as to exactly how the court's decision will be transferred into the actual rule. So we need to just be a little bit cautious. But clearly, if you remove some of these what are now found to be unlawful rules that restrict trade, then that is going to have some impact and probably makes it more attractive for a player to take his chances at walking out the door. So an example might be what's happened with some players in bomb squads. Those players at the moment may be reluctant to walk out the door and claim that effectively they've got just cause for walking out the door because they've been sidelined. They may have been reluctant to do that because of the uncertainty as to how other clubs would see them and whether other clubs would take them. If some of those rules are gone, we might find that players who are sidelined and made to train with the youth team or the reserves may decide actually they're going to walk out the door and take their chances. And that could have an effect on the transfer market. But as I say, I think
be a club like Chelsea potentially looking at this ruling and feeling a bit worried because of the size of the squad that they have at the moment.
Well, Chelsea have. We know that Chelsea have taken an unusual approach to the length of contracts and the number of players, and also what they're doing with players who they perceive to be outside of the first team mix. So they have more risk than most. That's definitely true. But as I say, I just think it's a little bit early for us to conclude how this is going to play out. But you are definitely right that a club that's got loads of players on 7-8 year contracts, if contracts become less powerful as a way to bind those players in, then of course Chelsea are going to be at the forefront of those clubs that have got issues versus other clubs, yes.
Would you go along with that as well, Dan?
Yeah, I think perhaps the bigger risk is not the bomb squad players or the big squads in that case, because a lot of those players aren't actually playing and contributing, but they're on big wages. The bigger risk is when you pay a lot of money for a player that other clubs want.
Yeah,
well, Chelsea have got that problem as well. So, it's look, as you say, Chelsea are going to be looking very carefully at these rules. Yeah.
Well, one of the things I found strange when I first came into football was the degree to which players were almost like slaves. They were almost owned by clubs and directed by football clubs. You know, it seems strange to me.
Do you feel that that's changing now, though? That kind of landscape is changing, or do you still feel that strongly about it?
No, I changed my view. I learned more about football. And it depends how you behave as a club as well. You know, if a player wants to leave, it depends how you treat them and that kind of stuff, and allow them to go and find somewhere else to be and stuff like that. But I think that this ruling is really fundamentally going to change things.
Are there certain clubs that you would say still treat players in that kind of vein?
Probably, yeah. Like even the term bomb squad, right, is pejorative, and it's about players that you've fallen out with. You don't want them at the training ground because they're bringing a bad attitude with them and that kind of stuff. You know, there is a problem there in football, I think, with contracts for players and big wages where things go sour, they're not performing, or they just fall out with the manager, that kind of stuff. I mean, it would be nice if there was a better mechanism to deal with that.
I think we should temper our sympathy for some of the Chelsea players, to be honest, given that
most of
them are on about 150 grand a week. So even if they are training with the reserves, it's quite a nice.
That's why they won't walk out.
It's quite a nice little gig.
That's why they won't walk out.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just finally on this, Stefan. Obviously, the biggest case and the most famous case to do with transfers that most people know is the Bosman ruling, all to do with free transfers. In the future, are we going to be talking about the Diarra ruling? Do you feel it will get to that level?
I suspect it won't, and that it will be around the edges of the transfer rules, as opposed to something as fundamental as the Bosman situation. And, it's interesting, really, when you look at it, that Bosman's 30 years ago. So before we get too excited about how frequent these monumental cases are coming about within football and transfers, it is worth remembering that once every 30 years is going to be quite slow progress in terms of changing the landscape. So, I think we just need, as I say, we need to be a little bit cautious that things are going to change dramatically. I suspect the changes will be around the edges and probably will be for the better. Those clauses, when you look at them in the cold light of day, those clauses do seem very strange, that you would restrict a player and effectively hold them to ransom for an international transfer certificate, not being issued by FIFA until 10 million euros.
Do you feel that the right ruling has been made?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it does seem a fair decision, but we'll have to see. I think we need to just watch that there's not knock-on effects that actually are not for the good of players and for the good of the game. There are good things about the security of tenure that a contract brings for a player. Players do like to sign long-term contracts. We know that again from Chelsea. So, and also we need to think about the game away from just the very best paid players at the top. The game actually has thousands of players who play in smaller leagues and in smaller divisions. And those players actually have different interests from some of the very big stars in the Premier League. And we have to be mindful of all the footballers when looking at these sorts of transfer rules.
And just on the topic of player power as well, Dale, recently we've had Man City's Rodri coming out and talking about the schedule and saying that actually, if it carries on in this way, players might end up striking. Do you feel that there is becoming a shift towards players having more of a say on their rights, and do you feel that that's a good thing?
Yeah, I think it is a good thing. This ruling, I think, is probably exactly that. It's giving rights to players to choose, who they play for when things are fundamentally broken down. I think we need sorry, it's not really to that point. I think there is more player power in the game right now, but I think we need a better mechanism when things don't work. Yes, players want long-term contracts, clubs want them as well, but when things don't work, we need a better way for ending things between clubs and players, because one of them is disaffected, or when both are disaffected, they'll agree to end it. But we need a betting mechanism as well, I think.